Step into the shadows of Paranormal M. We explore hauntings, cursed objects, and chilling secrets. Subscribe today and let the mystery find you the night they came home. This is a story that's been told in my family for over a century and a half. And since Halloween is near, it feels right to tell it again. My third great grandmother, we're going to call her Clara. Again. Maybe the youngest of six, and when the Civil War began, two of her siblings had already passed away. And her two older brothers, Samuel and Henry, joined the Union Army. The family were staunch abolitionists. Their farmhouse in Illinois was even rumored to stop on the Underground Railroad. By 1863, Clara was 15. The war was dragging on, and months had passed without a single letter from Samuel or Henry. It wasn't unusual, of course. Mail could take forever to travel through battlefields and muddy county roads. And then came one of those storms that seems to split the world in two. The rain came in torrents, and the wind screamed through the shutters. And the thunder rolled so violently it shook the floors. Still, Clara and her parents felt safe. The house was sturdy, built by Clara's grandfather himself. The only real worry was an old maple tree just outside her parents' window. It was massive. It was dead for years, but with the roots deep enough to hold through most anything. Clara was nearly asleep when she heard her name. It was Samuel's voice, clear as day, and she told herself it was her imagination. Then she heard it again, and Henry this time, so close it made her sit up. Then suddenly, the blanket was yanked from her bed, and that was Henry's old trick when, she wouldn't get up for chores. Lightning flashed outside, and for a brief, blinding second, she saw them both, Samuel and Henry, standing at the foot of her bed, their Union blues dark and soaked, and their faces pale, their coats stained with blood, and she screamed. Her parents burst into the room, and her mother holding her lamp, but the boys were gone, and Clara told them that, exactly what it was that she had seen. Her father did his best to calm her and said it was just a nightmare. Maybe it was brought on by worry. Then the thunder cracked again, louder and closer, and the sound of splintering wood tore through the house. The old maple tree had fallen. It had came straight through her parents' roof, smashing their bed into pieces. And if Clara hadn't screamed, they would have been asleep beneath it. Weeks later, the family received official notice. Samuel and Henry had both been killed 2 months before that storm. And until the day Clara died, she swore that her brothers came home that night, not to haunt her, but to save their parents. The Visitor by Moonlight. Over the weekend, I stayed at my grandma's house. Friday and Saturday night, actually. On Saturday, we were watching some late-night TV in her room. And eventually, both of us drifted off to sleep. Around 5 a.m., I woke up with that familiar, anxious pit in my stomach. The kind that squeezes your chest and makes you feel like something's wrong, even when it's not. It wasn't the first time. My anxiety has a habit of waking me up like that. The room was dark, except for a faint stream of moonlight slipping through the blinds. When my eyes adjusted, I turned my head toward my grandma's side of the bed and froze. There was a tall, dark figure standing there, a shadow. No face, no features, but the shape of a head and shoulders and body. And I could feel it looking at me. I don't know how I knew that, but I did, and my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I made this low, panic sound, like a groan or half yell. My grandma stirred beside me, shifting a little bit, but not waking up. And as she moved, the shadow slowly turned and walked out of the room calmly, just walked away. I stayed there completely still. My heart was thudding. When I finally dared to look at my grandma, she was snoring softly, so it wasn't her. And for some reason I knew it was a man. My grandpa used to sleep in his room, and on the very side of the bed I was in. Passed away 2 years ago. Figure wasn't his size or shape, and my grandpa was shorter and heavier. And this thing was tall and lean. I lay there trying to make sense of it, but my brain just kept looping. It wasn't him, so who or what was it? The typist in the vault. I heard this one secondhand, but it stuck with me. It came from a guy I used to work with, a painfully practical fellow. The kind who double checks his receipts and irons his socks. The sort of man who wouldn't exaggerate even if it earned him a raise. In the late 1980s, he was a junior programmer at a small town credit union in Washington State. The office was inside this creaky brick building that used to be a law firm, back when men wore hats to work. One evening, he stayed late debugging some code, and everybody else had gone home. The fluorescent lights were buzzing, and the air felt heavy with that after-hours quiet. Then he noticed it, a soft, uneven tack-tack-tack. Not the quick rhythm of a keyboard, but the hesitant pecking of a typewriter, as old-school and manual-sounding. He paused and listened and called out, "Hello?" No answer. The sound kept coming. It was faint and deliberate, but he decided to investigate. The desks were empty and chairs pushed in neatly. The noise seemed to come from a side hallway he'd never paid attention to before. At the end of it was a narrow wooden door, and had a brass knob built by time. The typing stopped as soon as he had his hand touching it. He opened it anyway. Inside a cramped storage room with boxes of stationery, stacks of ledger paper, and on like a metal filing cabinet. An old black Remington typewriter with no paper in it. There was no ribbon either. It was just sitting there like it had been waiting. He shut the door and left the office without saying a word. Never asked anyone about it. Never mentioned it again until years later, and that's when we were swapping weird stories over lunch. And that's it. No punchline, no wanted finale. Personally, I've rarely had it gone back, and maybe I left a blank sheet in that thing to see what it wanted to say, but not him. The man didn't have a curious bone in his body. Would you have checked? The guests at room 214. I once had a strange night at a Days Inn. It was just outside Round Rock in Texas. It had been one of those exhausting, heavy days. The kind where your chest feels too tight and you can't quite breathe right. At the time, I was lying in bed trying to calm down, and suddenly the air in the room dropped cold, like somebody had opened a freezer door. And then I heard a voice, and it was soft and as clear as day. "You're safe. You're going to be okay." I looked toward the bathroom, and there he was. Only way I can describe him is halfway between light and shadow. He had eyes, and they were kind ones, but no real mouth. Still, somehow I could hear him. He seemed almost startled that I could even do that. Maybe even as surprised as I was. He told me it had been decades, or, in his words, a very long time, he said. That was since anybody could both see and hear him. Then he turned toward the door that connected to the next room and called someone. His voice changed, and it was gentle and encouraging. He said something like, "She's kind, she can see us, don't be afraid, come on through." After a moment, a second figure peeked in. Only her head at first, through that thin crack between the doors. She kept asking me over and over, "Am I scaring you?" My husband was asleep beside me, turning over in his sleep. It made her flinch back, and the man stayed, though, hovering near the dresser, glancing at me like he wanted to make sure I was still hearing him. I told him quietly that I'd make my husband face the other way so she wouldn't be nervous. I got up twice that night to grab another sweater because it was freezing. I kept telling myself this had to be a dream, but I don't take meds. I'm not the type to imagine things. Eventually, he convinced me to step inside. She said she was worried because she didn't look normal, you could say. I told her I'd be okay with it. When she finally entered, she looked like a white shimmer in the air. Almost human-shaped, but with no face. Just light. And then she asked me if she could talk to my husband. Not to him exactly, but about him. She said she could tell he was a good man. Wanted to tell him how wonderful he was. She drifted close to him and whispered things I couldn't quite make out, all warm and kind. He stirred a little and she slipped into the door like a tide pulling away. I asked them if this meant I was going to die soon. The man's eyes softened and I heard a calm, clear no. Only if you choose to. They said that they were trapped there in that motel. At one point, the woman noticed my phone light up and my lock screen photos of one of our dogs, and she smiled and said, "You have 4, right?" I hadn't said anything about that. I showed her another picture and she lit up and said she loved animals. And then behind her, another shape flickered by the curtain. I asked the man if there was more like them. He nodded and said, "They all know you can see us and they want to come." That one didn't feel right. I said I didn't want that and that the shadow disappeared, but finally turned off the light and they asked if they could stay, and I said yes. I barely slept and I could still feel them there, whispering quietly to each other about how strange and wonderful it was that somebody could see them. When I woke up, the room was still and warm again and they were gone. It wasn't the first time something like this has happened. The first was when I was 12 and I saw a figure walk across our living room. But that time there was no voice, just silence. During the mid-90s, we lived in a narrow little townhouse. It was on the west side of Edmonton, tucked behind a strip mall and a row of pine trees. Cozy, yes, but absolutely haunted. My husband, our daughter, and I each had our own run-ins during those long years there. Our daughter, who was about 9, sometimes heard a little girl's voice chatting with her in the basement, asking her to come play. One afternoon, she and her best friend saw her doll swing start moving on its own. They came flying up the stairs, pale as a ghost, and another night she swore she saw a man walk out of her tiny office past her open bedroom door and down the hall. That was while her dad was still at work. She'd often end up asleep on the floor beside her bed and saying that she'd been woken by kids laughing and whispering in her room. My husband had his share too. He'd hear me calling for him in another room only to realize I wasn't even home. I'd be at the pool or the gym with her daughter, and his work bag and tools would get moved around when no one had touched them. He still insists he doesn't believe in ghosts, but the moment I bring that townhouse up, well, he goes quiet and changes the subject. As for me, the weirdness started small. Once I saw the foam cord swinging slowly back and forth in the hallway when no one was around. All the windows were closed. Another time I ran to the convenience store across the street and I left the door unlocked because I'd misplaced my keys. When I got back, door locked, I had to go back to the store and call my husband for the spare key. When I returned again, the damn door was unlocked. But the scariest moment happened on a quiet weekday morning around 9. still in bed reading when suddenly I heard a girl screaming, crying, and pounding on her front door. I bolted down the stairs, barefoot, half tripping over myself, yanked the door open. The noise stopped instantly, and the street outside was empty. Not a soul in sight. Stood there, my heart racing. Sat on the front steps for a while, trying to process what I just experienced. When my husband got transferred a few months later, I couldn't have packed faster. We've had strange things happen since, but nothing as intense as that townhouse. The man at the window. When I was around 13, I used to get terrifying sleep paralysis almost every night. I'd fall asleep fine, but a few hours later I'd wake up frozen and my body completely locked up. My bed was right next to the window back then, and every single time I'd see a tall, shadowy man standing just outside staring at me. He wore an old-fashioned bowler hat and a long coat, and I could always hear his faint jingling sound, like metal brushing against metal. Eventually, I realized it was a chain, a pocket watch swinging from his hand. The ticking was so sharp it felt like it was drilling into my skull, and I'd try to scream, but I couldn't even move my lips. And after months of this, I finally told my doctor and therapist. They decided to put me on sleep medication. The episode stopped after that, at least for a while. When I was 16, I started seeing this guy, really jealous and really toxic. We were together for about a year and a half, maybe. One afternoon, we're hanging out in my room playing games on my laptop, and out of nowhere, he went pale, like all the blood drained from his face. He turned toward the window, started shaking, and then burst into tears. I'd never seen him cry before. And after I calmed him down, he told me that he saw a tall man outside with a bowler hat and swinging a pocket watch. He said the man told him to leave me, or else something terrible would happen to his family. I had never told him about the sleep paralysis, not even once. And that scared me more than the paralysis ever did. Over the years, weird things kept happening in that house. Doors creaking open and things falling, and the strange sweet smell like burnt sugar drifting through the halls. I used to joke about it and call the figure Mr. Hollis. I won't lie, it just sounded like his name. A few nights ago, I told my grandfather about all this. It's while one of my friends was visiting, and he looked thoughtful and asked, "Did you say Mr. Hollis? And he had a watch?" When I nodded, he just got up and went downstairs without another word. 10 minutes later, he came back holding a small wooden box. Inside was an old pocket watch. It was heavy and tarnished. And on the back, engraved in fading letters, were the words E. Hollis, 1894. He said it belonged to his grandfather, a man who supposedly disappeared one winter's night and was never found. Now I can't stop wondering, was that really just sleep paralysis? When the walls remembered. I'm in my 30s now, but the last strange thing happened maybe 2 years ago. At the time, I was living alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Seattle. And for weeks before it happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I lay down at night, I felt like that. You know those goosebumps you get in the back of your neck, like you're being stared at? It's exactly like that. And then one night around 3:20 a.m., I woke up with that same heavy feeling. I turned my head slightly toward the doorway, and I felt something shove my face back into the pillow. Not a gentle touch, it was like a firm hand pressing down. I panicked, jumped out of bed, and flipped on every light in the apartment. Checked every room and every corner, and there was nothing. I was completely alone there. But my first brush with the weird stuff started much earlier. I was about 12. My family, my mom, dad, and older brother, they had just moved into a quiet neighborhood in Arizona. And on the first night there, something was off. My bed was one of those loft styles. Top for sleeping, bottom for a little bit of desk space. Not long after I climbed in, though, the whole frame began to shake, and it wasn't just a small tremor. Felt like someone was gripping the posts and shaking them with all their strength. It went on for several minutes. And it didn't stop there, because every single night the same thing. My parents didn't believe a word of it, though. They thought it was nerves or dreams, but then the alarm clock started going off at random times in the middle of the night. Never twice at the same hour. My dad got furious. He was thinking I was playing with it. He never used that alarm, not once, and for the record, my brother had the same model of bed in his room, and his never moved an inch. After about a year and a half, we moved again, and just like that, nothing. Bed never shook, clock never beeped again. Everything was normal. Years later, though, my dad admitted something that chilled me. One night, he'd heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. He's thinking, I guess maybe he's even messing around, so he just opened his door to yell at me. Instead of me, he swore that he saw a tall, shadowy figure standing right in front of my door. He ducked back into his room immediately and didn't come out until morning. When he told me that, I asked why he never believed me. He said he just couldn't accept that kind of thing could be real, until it happened to him. I don't talk that much about these things. Only a handful of people. But sometimes I think about that house and the shaking and the alarms and the shadow. I wonder if maybe the walls are still remembering us. The Quiet Corner. I've never been the superstitious type. Strange things have happened before, sure, but I can usually talk myself out of believing anything weird is real. That was until this week. There are only 2 experiences in my life that I simply couldn't explain. Now, there's a third. So here's what happened, and I'd really appreciate hearing if anybody's been through something like it. A 23-year-old female. I was lying in my bed and scrolling on my phone through a bunch of social media and commenting on everything I see. I was waiting for my boyfriend, who's a 25-year-old male, to come back from brushing his teeth. Our bed sits right up against the wall under the window. We have a dog, a small mutt, crawled up behind my knees under the blanket. The room was dark except for the bluish glow from the streetlights outside. They leaked right through the blinds, and the air from the open window moved the curtains a little bit. Everything felt normal. Then I noticed movement, a shape on the side of the bed. It looked exactly like someone my boyfriend's height, but just standing there. Head tilted a bit, slightly down, and hands at his sides. Thought he was just trying to freak me out, I guess. Well, maybe it was payback or something. Well, I blinked and I even reached out like I expected to bump into him. There's nothing. My heart skipped, but I forced myself to laugh it off, and I told myself the light from the street must be messing with my eyes. I kept my phone's flashlight on just to make sure he couldn't sneak up on me. And then I felt something, a quick light pressure on my ankle, almost like a finger tab. I froze, yanked my leg back, and aimed my flashlight toward the foot of the bed, and my dog lifted his head but didn't move, still half asleep. I started breathing slower, trying to convince myself it was just the blanket shifting. But then it happened again, and longer this time, like someone dragging their hand up through the blanket, enough to wrinkle the fabric against my leg. And I jumped up so fast I nearly fell over the nightstand trying to reach the light switch. I shouted for my boyfriend to hurry up, and he called back something like, "I'm coming, relax." I couldn't even answer. My hands were shaking. When he finally came out, I told him what happened, and he looked concerned. But before I could say more, a scream echoed from outside. It was a woman's voice, sharp and desperate. It wasn't right next to our building, but it was close enough to sound too real, and she yelled something like, "Please help." And then I swear I heard, "He's here." And then it stopped, and it was silence. Not even a car in the distance. I called the police trembling, but by the time they picked up, I didn't even know what to report. My boyfriend checked outside, nobody there. It's been 2 days since that night. I still keep the light on when I go to bed, and I'm supposed to take a solo drive across the country next month. I used to be excited. Now I'm not so sure I'll enjoy the dark stretches of highway quite the same way. The thing on the rooftop. Hello, friends. What I'm about to share is one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. And, by the way, it's not fake. It's the first time in my life I've ever seen something that I truly believe was a ghost. I live in a small town in Chhattisgarh. It's in India. And every night after dinner I step outside for a smoke, and kind of my daily routine. Just a short walk from my house is a row of old government quarters surrounded by trees. But that night everything started as usual. It was summer and the air was hot, so I bought a bottle of cold water from the fridge. Around 11:30 p.m., while smoking, talking to my girlfriend on the phone, I stood near the small black gate that leads into the colony. The gate was always closed at night, and I remember checking it earlier, and it was definitely locked. While chatting, I turned my head slightly upward just casually, and that's when I saw it. On the roof of one of the quarters stood a tall, black, human-shaped figure. At first, I thought it was someone from the building. Maybe they were out late to take down their dried clothes. But something just didn't feel right. The figure wasn't moving normally. It didn't even look like it was standing on solid ground, more like it was floating or leaning backward unnaturally. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, and maybe the darkness made it look strange. But then I swear the thing moved. It leaned back slowly, as if it was melting into the shadows behind the rooftop. And then it was gone. No sound, no footsteps, just silence. My heart started pounding, and I quickly walked toward the quarters to check the gate, and it was still closed. Nobody could have gone up or down without opening it, and I stood there frozen with a cigarette in my hand, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I'm writing this now because my mind just can't process it. I've been outside that same place hundreds of nights, doing the same thing. Never like this ever happened before. I don't know if you believe in ghosts, but I'm telling you, after tonight, I'm 100% sure they do exist. If anybody wants, I can post pictures of the area and the quarters. So thanks for reading, my friends. I hope I never see that thing again. Stay safe and don't go smoking alone at midnight. Don't tell me what to do. But maybe take his advice. The house that didn't want us there. Me, my mom, my stepdad, and all three of my brothers, we rented this beach house in Outer Banks. We were planning to stay 2 whole weeks, and the place looked perfect online. 3 floors, ocean view, big balcony. When we got there, it was pretty big. I mean, me and 2 of my brothers shared a room with bunk beds on the middle floor. My oldest brother got his own room downstairs, and our parents stayed at the far end of our hallway. And that first night, I couldn't sleep. My middle brother couldn't either, and our little one. They were totally passed out. It was like nothing happened. But for us, every time I started drifting off, something strange would happen. Like scratching sounds with faint knocking or whispers we couldn't place. One night, me and my brother decided to just check it out. We climbed to the top floor. Everyone else was asleep and the lights were off. but we could hear this light tapping near the big balcony window. It was so high up, no tree could have reached it. We bolted back downstairs, slammed the door, and locked ourselves in. When we told our parents the next morning, my mom just said, "I don't like the feeling of this house." Even my oldest brother admitted he'd been awake all night because he felt off. By the end of that week, things got worse, and we left 3 days early, and none of us had ever talked about that house again. It's like it didn't want us there. The top floor was the kitchen and living room. A big open space with windows everywhere and that huge balcony overlooking the beach. That was where we'd hear the scratching most nights. During the day, we'd play board games like Uno and charades. Nothing creepy, but every now and then I'd feel something watching us through that balcony glass. I'd turn around fast, nothing there, but it felt real, like something pressing its stare into my back. One night I told my brother we shouldn't step outside for some air, and we circled around to where the balcony was, expecting to find a bird or maybe loose branches scraping the wall. There was nothing, and it was completely still. And then out of nowhere we heard this small boy giggling, soft but close. We thought it was our little brother sneaking around, but when we realized he was inside asleep, we just ran back in faster than we ever had. When we told our parents, they checked outside, came back and said, "There's no one out there. Are you sure you didn't imagine it?" And I swear that moment made me question my own sanity. Our floor was the middle one, bedrooms and one long hallway. The fifth night was the worst, and ironically, it was the only night I managed to fall asleep for a while. Around midnight, I woke to slow footsteps outside a room. Thought maybe it was my mom heading to the bathroom, but when I peeked out, there was no one there, and then I saw a faint glow from upstairs, the kitchen light, I think. I could have sworn we turned that off, so I went up to check. The air up there was heavy and still, like the ocean had stopped breathing. No one was around, and for some reason I walked toward the balcony, which is the biggest mistake. I opened the door and looked down, and there she was. A woman standing on the sand below, and she was pale and her hair long and dark. She was wearing something like white, like an old nightgown. Her eyes were completely blacked out. She wasn't moving, just looking up at me. And yet she looked familiar, like somebody I'd seen before. As for the bottom floor, where my oldest brother stayed, we never found out much. He said he'd hear footsteps above him, even when everyone was asleep, so he never stayed in that room again for the second night. And none of us have been back to the Outer Banks since. Nextly, we have the house that wouldn't stay quiet. I think it all began early this year. Let me just take you right into it. For context, I'll start with the house. I live in the big, quiet home in Massachusetts with my fiancé and his parents. I've been here almost 4 years now, and we stay in the lower level. It's completely finished. More like a little apartment than a basement. The place was built around 2002, and one of the first odd things I noticed about this property was that when you look it up on Google Maps, it seems to show up as an old chapel site. But the actual chapel, according to Google, is about 1.5 miles down the road. Strange little coincidence, right? Anyway, I just brushed it off until I started seeing something. Out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch this pale gray figure near the small kitchen area at night. At first, I figured I was imagining it. I'd had a few glasses of wine those nights, so maybe that was it. But it kept happening, even when I was totally sober. It was tall, almost human-shaped, but never clear enough to see a face. Just a blur that would vanish if I turned my head. By March, my fiancé's mom posted something on Facebook that caught my eye. She works in healthcare like me, and she asked if anybody else had ever brought something home from the hospital. She said that she felt like somebody was watching her, and it freaked me out, and I messaged her right away. I told her what I'd been seeing downstairs. She burned sage in the house soon after, and honestly, it seemed to help for a while. Then came April 23rd, and she made another post saying that she needed another cleansing because the knocking sounds were back. The dogs were barking at empty hallways again. That night I woke up to go to the bathroom, and as soon as my feet touched the floor, the printer across the room turned itself on and filled the whole space with light. My heart dropped. I just did my business, turned over, and tried to sleep again. A bit later, I'm half asleep when I just felt the bed jolt, like someone had hit the corner of it. And then I felt a breeze move my hair, and I froze, pulled the blanket up over my head, and didn't move again until that morning. On May 9th, my fiancé's mom posted again. She said she saw a thick black shape float past the hallway, and coincidentally, that same weekend, my fiancé and I were away in Vermont. When I came home, I didn't see her post until 2 days later. That was about what happened on Mother's Day. May 12th, and that day already hurt. Marked 1 year since I lost my baby. It also happened to be Mother's Day. That's horrible. I was inside fixing plates for dinner when I saw something drift past the hallway low on the ground. It was darker than the shadows around it. It moved toward the spot right near her basement door. Later, when I asked my fiancé's mom about her own sighting, she said it was in that exact same spot. And as we're talking, the smoke alarms went off for no reason at all. So far, the only ones who've seen or felt anything are me, my fiancé's mom, and his sister. The men haven't seen a thing, and I hate being alone in this house now. The air just feels heavy, like something's waiting. And I work with a woman who's kind of a paranormal investigator. I told her the story, and she stopped me mid-sentence to ask, "Do you light candles often?" I said I used to, but not lately. She said, "Something keeps saying to me, go ahead and light that candle. Please don't." Turns out the original home that stood in this property burned down decades ago. The detached garage out back is the only thing that survived. So yeah, I'm officially done lighting candles. The Green Monk at number 42. It had been maybe a week since I moved into this chilly little 70s flat on the edge of town. It's the kind of place where the walls seem to hum at night. And on my first night alone there, I decided to distract myself with some creepy Reddit stories on YouTube. The air felt heavy, though, like the flat itself was holding its breath, and even Milo, my greyhound I inherited with the lease, didn't seem to care. He was sprawled out beside me, twitching to sleep like he was chasing ghosts. And just as video had started buffering, I heard a faint shuffle from the corridor. Not the pipes this time, but something slower and deliberate. I paused listening, and when I peeked out, the hallway was still empty. The dim orange light from the stairwell barely reached my door. I was about to close it again. That's when I saw movement, a small, hunched figure in the corner of my vision coming up the stairs. My stomach dropped. The person was dressed in a long robe like an old monk, moving painfully slow. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, and every hair on my arm standing on end. Milo didn't stir. I thought about jumping from the kitchen window, second floor with concrete below. Not ideal. Instead, I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. I opened the door again and looked down the stairwell. And he was still there, and this time I could see him clearly under the flickering light. His skin looked waxy and pale green like wet paper. And his hood was tattered and pointed, and he was muttering softly, scanning the floor as though looking for something lost long ago. His movements were almost sad. My phone, of course, was dead, though it had been plugged in all evening. And that's just what happens in this place. Everything works until you need it most. I feel ya. The steps started again, slower and closer. Milo woke up then and let out a deep growl that rattled the air. The footsteps stopped, right outside my door, too. I swear I could feel him standing there listening just inches away. We waited 10 seconds, maybe a minute, I don't know. Eventually, the quiet came back and I didn't hear him leave, but he was gone. And that was 6 months ago. Milo and I still live here, and sometimes at night when the stairwell creaks and the air smells faintly of damp stone, I think about him. Maybe he's still searching or still lost, somewhere in the dark corners of number 42. The house with the yellow curtains. My aunt's house is haunted. Period. I've been seeing it for years, but everybody just laughs it off because nothing bad has ever happened there, as they say. Recently, though, a few family members started noticing weird stuff, finally asking if I thought the place might be haunted. I just gave my mom a look like, oh, now you believe me. Anyway, let me tell you a few things. When I was a kid, maybe 10, I used to see figures standing in the hallway outside my room. They weren't full people, more like dark, fuzzy outlines that kind of swayed. Sometimes they'd peek in like they were checking if I was asleep. It freaked me out completely. But I was young, so everybody said it was just dreams. A few years later in high school, I started thinking maybe I was losing my grip. One night, I'm brushing my hair in the mirror when a voice behind me said, "Who are you talking to?" I spun around so fast I nearly fell over. Thought my aunt was playing around, but she was in her room with her door shut, already snoring. I tried to shake it off. I went to bed, and I was just about to sleep when I heard two voices. They were whispering from the corner of the room. "Does she see us?" "Not yet." I didn't sleep in that room again for a week. Later, I told a few friends at school. They joked that I should charge rent to the ghosts. A few weeks after that, my friend Mia came over to study, and we made popcorn, sat down in the living room, and asked, "What movie should we watch?" Before she could answer, a tiny, cheerful voice said, "Can I pick?" We both froze because there's no kids in the house. Mia didn't even grab her jacket, she just bolted. Years passed. I moved out, went to college, and forgot about it. But then last winter, I stayed at my aunt's for a few weeks to help her with her knee surgery. First few nights are fine. Quiet even. Then one morning over coffee, she asked, "Did you call me last night? You said my name." And I hadn't. Later that day, she said she heard humming in the kitchen while she was alone. I mentioned it to my cousin, who also lives there. She gave me this look before saying, "So, you've heard it too." Apparently, she hears somebody calling her name when she's in the shower, or whispering behind her door. She thought it was me until she realized I wasn't even home one of those times. Flickering lights, sure, wiring, and the shadows, maybe imagination, but now that everyone hears the voices, well, that's different. I don't know what's in that house, and it's been there long before me, and it's getting comfortable. The night the forest screamed. I've never told this story before. Fair warning, because it's a weird one. My grandparents passed away a couple of years apart. Grandma in 2020 and Grandpa in 2022. She'd fought cancer for years, and after she was gone, she just deflated. He didn't want to end up in a hospital bed, and not after watching her go through all that. In the end, he got some sort of aggressive eye cancer, and the doctors told us it would be fast, like days fast. Then one evening, my dad called, and it was Grandpa's last day. My sister, my girlfriend, and I, we just went over right away. He was asleep when we arrived, breathing slow and peaceful. We didn't wake him. I held his hand, I kissed his forehead, and I said my quiet goodbye. Not cinematic, but honest. We decided to stay at my mom's that night. Didn't feel right to drive home. Later, when the house was quiet and heavy, my girlfriend and I went for a walk into the woods to smoke a joint. Had to hide from my parents, of course. It was just after sunset, and it was cool and calm. And then halfway back, we heard it, and the sound ripped through the forest. It was like some prehistoric monster that had been dropped into Canada by accident. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't anything local. It sounded like the jungle. We froze with wide eyes, and we were high as hell. My girlfriend whispered, "Could that be like a bear?" I said, dead serious, "If that's an omen, I'm out." We bolted, sprinting through the woods like two idiots in a horror movie. And when we stumbled back into the house with our hearts racing, I checked my phone, and one unread text. "Grandpapa est parti," which is Grandpa's gone. The next morning, I told my mom about the noise, and she went still, looked me straight in the eye. Was it like a jungle call? Turns out our neighbors, the ones connected to the woods, they had just brought home a peacock. A temporary peacock. So yeah, that's terrifying. Otherworldly cry of death that we heard in the dark. It was a peacock. I swear that bird owes me a decade of life expectancy. I'd like to understand the use for a temporary peacock more than I ever had in my life before. And I think I'd wondered it several times prior, even that. The night my room turned into a drawing. Hey. So I was just chatting with my partner of 11 years about something that happened when I was a kid. I figured I'd throw it out here. Maybe somebody has an explanation, too. And for context, I'm generally a very rational person. I don't buy into ghost stories. I usually roll my eyes when people start with, "You won't believe what happened." But a few days ago, I never went on about how her house was haunted, and she's a bit eccentric. Somehow it pulled this memory right out of storage. It must have been around 10 or 11, and I'm 32 now. And one weekend, my best friend was sleeping over, and I shared a small room with my younger brother. Bunk beds, of course. Normally, I slept on the top and he on the bottom, but since my friend was the guest, I let him choose, and naturally he picked the top. But here's where things start to get weird. We decided for some reason to sleep with our heads at the opposite end of the bed that night, right next to the wall with the light switch. And it was late and the lights are out, and we were whispering about whatever 11-year-olds whisper about. That's when suddenly he went completely still and said, "Shh, be quiet." Something about the tone froze me. My eyes were closed at first, but I opened them. The entire room was glowing. Not light-on glowing. More like everything was made of white paper and drawn in black pencil outlines. The furniture, the walls, even the bunk bed above me, all outlines like we were inside of a sketch. I whispered, "Are you seeing this?" And he just hissed, "Don't talk." Then we both heard it, and it was slow, and it was heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, and they were deliberate and measured. The kind of steps that know exactly where they're going. The door was open just a bit, and through the crack I could see the hallway. Same weird glow, but a pale yellow tint this time. I started freaking out and whispered for him to just turn on the light. It was literally right next to his head, and he wouldn't move. So I jumped up, smacked the switch, and bam, normal color, normal shadows. Everything instantly back to how it should be. We both just sat there listening, and there was nothing. Then a single thud was downstairs, like a cupboard door slamming shut. And I ran to my mom's room, and she was across the hall, and her light was off. But she was half awake, or pretending to be. My little brother was asleep on her floor, completely dead to the world. I asked if she'd ever heard anything, and she just muttered something about car headlights, which made absolutely no sense. But anyway, my friend and I still talk about that night every now and then. He's had a few strange things happen to him since. Things that made me believe he's not just making this up. And honestly, I still can't explain it. The Night Without Eyes. When I was 12, I remember lying awake in bed, somewhere around 10:30 at night. I wasn't tired, not even close. The door to my room was half open on the left side of my bed, and I kept staring through it. I was doing absolutely nothing, just waiting for sleep to find me. My parents were in their bedroom down the hall. I could faintly hear the low hum of their TV. My mom always kept a small crystal lamp on her nightstand. It gave me off this sort of soft orange glow, spilled faintly into the hallway. Because of that, my room wasn't completely dark. I could see enough to make out the furniture, but it still felt like a nighttime sort of thing. Eventually, I decided maybe the light was keeping me awake, so I rolled over to face the wall. And that's when I saw it. There, as clear as anything, a small figure. A child. Its skin looked ghostly pale, almost gray, like something that hadn't seen warmth in a long time. The hair was short, straight, and black as ink, and its mouth unopened, unnaturally wide at that, like it could swallow a whole apple without trying. But the eyes, there were no eyes, just two black empty holes where they should have been. And yet, somehow, I could feel it staring at me. It wasn't moving, it wasn't breathing, it just stood there facing me completely still. For a few seconds I froze. I was unable to move or even think, and the air felt thick and heavy. Then everything inside me screamed, "Run!" I bolted out of bed faster than I ever thought possible. Tore down the hall to my parents' room, and I was crying, shaking so hard I could barely speak. I'm 26 now. I still remember the night as vividly as it happened yesterday. The light from the hallway and the silence and that horrible, eyeless face. I've never felt anything like that presence again. Even now, thinking about it gives me goosebumps. I've never been into horror movies or ghosts or anything supernatural, so whatever that thing was, it was something entirely new to me. Has anyone else ever seen something like that? Or know what it might mean? Because after all these years, I still don't have an answer. The Woman on the Ridge. So for context, I work as a ranger at a sort of county nature reserve, and it's been around since the late 1960s. It's a huge area, winding trails, old oak groves, open meadows, and the works. There's this one ridge I like to escape to during lunch breaks. It's quiet and breezy and high up enough that most visitors don't bother climbing there. Anyway, one day around 12:15, I'm sitting up there with my sandwich, looking down toward the picnic grounds, and I noticed something strange. A woman I'd never seen before. She had light brown hair and wore what looked like an old-fashioned floral dress, maybe something from the mid-70s. She was completely soaked, and this was on a bright, clear afternoon. The only water nearby was a small pond. She wasn't muddy at all, just wet, like she'd been caught in a storm that didn't exist. She was hugging herself and walking fast and looked scared, like she was trying not to cry. I called out, "Hey, you all right?" And there was nothing. She didn't even glance at me. and then louder said, "Do you need help?" And again, no reaction at all, not even the faintest acknowledgement that I existed. I looked around, expecting maybe somebody else nearby, but there was nobody. Turned back to the trail she was heading down, and she was just gone. It's a long open path, no turns, no brush thick enough to hide somebody that quickly. Next week, same shift, same ridge. Around 12:15 again, I hear footsteps coming up the slope. I turn around, and there she is. Same woman, same soaked dress, same haunted look. She walks past me down the ridge and around the bend and gone. Actually jogged after her this time, thinking maybe she really needed help. When I rounded the curve, there was nothing. Just the sound of wind in the grass. The third time, and yeah, there was a third time, I was ready. I went early, sat in the same spot, and sure enough, at 12:15 sharp, she appeared again. Same direction, same everything. I followed, keeping my distance, and when she was just about to disappear behind the same strand of trees, she vanished mid-step. No trace, no footprints, no sound. I dug through every bit of local history I could find. Park records and newspapers and even police reports. Nothing about a missing woman from the 70s. No accidents near that ridge. But I swear something about that spot feels colder now. Haven't eaten lunch up there since. The girl by the TV. I have a strange little story that happened to my younger brother. It was around 2008 or 2009. This wasn't just once. It happened a couple of times. The first time was at my grandmother's apartment. Everyone was having one of those peaceful afternoons. Music playing and people talking, that kind of thing. And then out of nowhere, we heard my brother crying from the hallway. Now, this hallway connected straight to the living room. You could see all the way down. We all turned, and there he was, sitting on the floor, crying and pushing himself backward like he was trying to get away from something. We asked him what was wrong, but he couldn't say a word. He just screamed and cried. My grandma pulled him close, sat him against her legs, but he kept pressing his head back as if something was still in front of him. And in our culture, there's a small charm, kind of like a seed or an acorn. It's used to protect you from spirits. And if you wear it, the spirit supposedly can't follow you anymore. So my grandma did that. And after a couple of hours, things kind of finally calmed down. But later that night, I asked him what happened, and he whispered, "There was a girl. She kept coming closer to my face." A few years later, we moved into a new house. And 5 days before the move, my brother and I went to explore the backyard. And there was a little gate at the back, and my brother went to check it out. It led to the back door of the house. About 5 minutes later, he came running back to me, pale as a ghost. He said, "I just saw somebody walk into the back door, and he had a tall hat like Abraham Lincoln and a black suit." We didn't say a word to anyone, just pretended that nothing happened. A year after that, we're all watching a movie in the living room. My brother had a fever, and I'm lying on the couch next to us. Everything was quiet until he suddenly sat up and said, "Who is that?" I asked who's who. He pointed toward the TV, and I thought that he meant one of the actors, but he pointed again. And this time, right next to the TV, my stomach dropped. I asked where and what it looked like. He said she's standing next to the TV and her hair is covering her face. It's been about 6 years since then. I never figured out why my brother saw those things. But maybe some kids really do see what the rest of us can't. The girl by the church tree. So this happened a few months back, around late May. Had a weekend sleepover with my 3 best friends. and our grand plan was to make s'mores and binge a scary game, the quarry, stay up until dawn. I live in a quiet suburb and kind of blurs into the countryside. But across the street are a few houses, and behind mine there's this huge open field owned by a Catholic church. It sort of sits right in the middle of it. Since it was summer break and the weather was perfect, we decided to play tag in the church playground. With my glowing NeoPixel lightsaber, obviously. My friend showed up around 5:30. We exchanged some small gifts and demolished a pizza and started downloading the quarry on my PS4. While it was loading, I went outside to play tag before sunset. The light was golden. The air smelled like grass. We ran until our legs ached. Later, we roasted marshmallows, laughing too loud, and finally headed back to the basement to play the game for hours. Around 10 p.m., somebody had the genius idea to go back outside. It was properly dark now, perfect for running around with a glowing lightsaber. Ben and Noah took the saber to one side of the playground, while Carter and I ran through the grass toward a small corner near 2 trees and a wooden bench. As we rounded the corner, both of us froze. And right beside one of the trees, it looked like there was a little girl, knees tucked up, head buried in her arms. She didn't move, and for a full second we just stared. Then Carter whispered, "It's just roots or shadows." We both nervously laughed it off and went back to playing. And nothing else weird happened that night. We went back inside and forgot about it mostly. Until tonight. Carter and I were shooting hoops in my driveway. That's when he saw a man sitting on his porch across the street, smoking. Totally normal, but for some reason it made us remember that night in May. One thing led to another, and of course, we decided to go back to the church field. Same lightsaber, same time of night, around 10:30. And everything looked identical, except for one thing. There was no root, no bump in the ground, no shape that could possibly look like what we'd seen. We even walked around shining the lightsaber from every single angle, looking for any hint of that same silhouette. We tried sitting by the tree, testing the shadows, moving the bench, trying to recreate that shape. The only way it worked was as if one of us actually sat there, curled up like that figure. So yeah, the most logical explanation is that somebody was sitting there that night, maybe crying, maybe watching us, but neither of us saw anyone walk across the open field to get there or leave afterwards. Could it have been a ghost? I don't know. We tested every theory. Tree roots, missing roots, weird shadows, even pranksters. None of it fits. The door that wouldn't stay shut. I used to live in this small one-story house. It's barely 4 rooms, single bathroom squeezed together. Some of my school friends happened to live nearby, which was kind of nice. Before we even moved in, one of their moms told us that a boy had apparently died in that house years ago. He hung himself in the back room. I was 11, so I didn't really care or really believe it. When I first stepped inside with my mom and my older brother, we were just checking out rooms, figuring out who would sleep where. The moment I walked into the back right room, though, something hit me. The air felt heavy. The place was darker than the other places, even with the blinds open. Cold and sad, like the walls remembered something. My mom and brother both paused, and later I invited 2 of my friends over and I told them to go in there without saying anything about it. One thought it was fine, said I was just being dramatic. The other froze halfway through the doorway and just said, "Dude, that room feels wrong." But anyway, that's the setup. Now for the real stories. I've got a bunch, but these 3 are the ones that still make my heart pound when I think about them now. The first one is, well, the door that opened itself is what we'll call it. I was around 15, and I'm 19 at the time now. But back then, I was obsessed with this game called Warframe. I'd played with my friend Jason over Xbox. One night around 2, I'm in the living room because the Wi-Fi never worked in my bedroom no matter what we tried. I was half focused on the game when something moved in the corner of my eye. I turned and swore on everything the door to that weird back room was slowly opening by itself. Not creaking from the wind, not moving because of the draft, just opening. I froze, and I remember whispering Jason's name to the mic. I kept asking what was wrong. I just couldn't answer. And after maybe 5 seconds, it stopped, and I didn't move for another 10. If anything else had happened that night, I probably would have moved in with my dad right then. The second one is called The Experiment. After that, I told my mom. She rolled her eyes at first, but when she saw the door standing open later that day, she got quiet. We decided to test it. We'd close the door, pull on it, and make sure it was firmly shut, and it was. We even checked if her dog could have done it. But it was a round knob, not a handle he could jump on. So one evening before heading to my grandparents' place for dinner, we made sure it was closed tightly. When we got back, I was racing my brother to the bathroom, and I kind of froze mid-run. The door was open again. I just stood there completely still because I remembered the experiment. And my mom saw it too and just muttered, "What the hell?" The closet. This last one didn't feel that scary in the moment, but looking back, it really was. I was lying in bed in a school night watching YouTube, starting to drift off. I turned my phone off, plugged it in, and shut my eyes. Then I heard this soft clinking. My hangers in the closet were rattling. I looked over and they were all swaying slightly, like somebody was brushing past them. I told myself it was just the air conditioner, and I rolled over, turned my back to the closet. And that's when a chill ran across my whole body. I heard one of the hangers fall. Then slow footsteps. Soft, slow, coming from the closet toward my bed. I just whispered to myself, "Nope, I'm going to sleep." And somehow I actually did, and when I did wake up, I remembered everything. I started crying quietly and told my mom, and that was the first time I saw her look genuinely scared. We lived there for 5 years and finally moved out last year. The day we left, the top deadbolt on the front door clicked shut by itself, as if we were loading the car. None of us said anything, we just left. Looking back, I never really felt in danger, I just felt uneasy, like something in that house wanted to be seen, but couldn't be. I still think about that boy sometimes, the one they said died there. Maybe he never left. The tenant who wasn't there. In 1987, I had a friend named Mark. And yeah, it's his real name. They were searching for a new place to rent. We lived in a small university town, where rent was a little bit too high to be comfortable. So when Mark stumbled upon a 2-bedroom house with a fenced-in yard and freshly painted walls, and rent that didn't make him cry, he thought he'd struck gold. It looked perfect. So we moved in. A week later, Mark showed up at my house late in the evening, sat down with my mom and me, and after some awkward small talk, asked if he could stay the night. My mom said sure, and I was puzzled. His new place was barely a 10-minute drive away, and that's when he told me something was off about the house. He said it felt strange, like somebody was still there when he was alone. The doors kept unlocking by themselves, and the stove would click on in the middle of the night. Now, I've always been like the spooky stuff girl that grew up, and the one who reads about hauntings and swears she can sense energy. So of course I was all in. The next day we went to check it out. place felt normal enough, just a faint trace of an older woman's presence and maybe a small dog. Harmless. I decided I'd stay the night with Mark and his girlfriend, who'd also had some weird experiences apparently. Before leaving to grab dinner, we made a big show of locking every single door. When we came back, the carport door was unlocked. Mark brushed it off, saying maybe the landlord had come by, and we locked it again, checked it twice. 30 minutes later, it was unlocked again. Fine, faulty doorknob, no big deal. Then, while we're sitting in the living room, a framed picture slid off the wall and hit the floor. Okay, maybe bad drywall. But then every picture, every single one, fell at once. The stereo blasted on full volume. Mark jumped up and turned it off, and just as he reached it, the volume dropped to a whisper on its own. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The stove was burning hot. One of the burners was on, and nobody had even cooked in that house yet. And that night we tried to sleep, and around 2 a.m. the stereo came to life again, louder than ever. I was already halfway down the hall when Mark caught up to me, and just as we turned the corner, the stereo shut itself off. And this was the 80s, there's no universal remotes then. And that's when I often saw him. An old man sitting at the dining room table, just glowering at us. His voice was raspy and furious. He said, "Get out, this is my house." He didn't want anyone there. After the others went back to bed, I sat and I tried to reason with him. I told him he was gone, that his wife was waiting for him, and he wasn't having it. A few weeks later, Mark packed up and left. The landlord said nobody ever lasted more than a month. And years later, my cousin just moved in at that same neighborhood. I'd drive past that house on the way to her place. And one day I saw a young couple moving in, happy and smiling with boxes everywhere. Poor souls. A month later I drove by again, moving truck and boxes going back in. I stopped by as they were loading up, and the husband looked frustrated and said that they didn't need to move, and the wife stood quietly and pale and tired and asked gently, "Is it because of the angry old man?" And her eyes went wide. "Yes," she whispered. "How could you possibly know?" I told her about Mark, about the noise and the stove and the voice. She looked relieved and terrified, and their story was exactly the same. The Girl by the TV. I have a strange little story that happened to my younger brother. It was around 2008 or 2009. This wasn't just once. It happened a couple of times. The first time was at my grandmother's apartment. Everyone was having one of those peaceful afternoons. Music playing, people talking, that kind of day. And then out of nowhere, we heard my brother crying from the hallway. Now, this hallway connected straight to the living room. You could see all the way down. We all turned, and there he was, sitting on the floor, crying and pushing himself backward like he was trying to get away from something. We asked him what was wrong, but he couldn't say a word. He just screamed and cried. My grandma pulled him close, sat him against her legs, but he kept pressing his head back as if something was still in front of him. And in our culture, there's a small charm, kind of like a seed or an acorn. It's used to protect you from spirits. And if you wear it, the spirit supposedly can't follow you anymore. So my grandma did that, and after a couple of hours, things kind of finally calmed down. But later that night, I asked him what happened, and he whispered, "There was a girl. She kept coming closer to my face." A few years later, we moved into a new house. And 5 days before the move, my brother and I went to explore the backyard. And there was a little gate at the back, and my brother went to check it out. It led to the back door of the house. About 5 minutes later, he came running back to me, pale as a ghost. He said, "I just saw somebody walk into the back door, and he had a tall hat like Abraham Lincoln and a black suit." we didn't say a word to anyone, just pretended that nothing happened. A year after that, we're all watching a movie in the living room. My brother had a fever, and I'm lying on the couch next to us. Everything was quiet until he suddenly sat up and said, "Who is that?" I asked who's who. He pointed toward the TV, and I thought that he meant one of the actors, but he pointed again. And this time, right next to the TV, my stomach dropped. I asked where and what they looked like. He said she's standing next to the TV and her hair is covering her face. And it's been about 6 years since then. Never figured out why my brother saw those things. But maybe some kids really do see what the rest of us can't. The Lady by the Creek. I used to spend my summers in my mother's father's cabin. It's tucked deep into the woods of northern Michigan, and my brother and I would run wild through the trees. We'd be following deer paths and pretending that we were explorers. We got lost often, but as long as we found the creek that ran behind the train tracks, we could always make our way home. One afternoon, when I was about 8 and my brother maybe 12, he got tired of me tagging along and darted off into the woods without a word. I wandered after him for a while before realizing he was really gone. I remember the panic rising, my throat sore from yelling his name, until I stumbled upon a clearing with a little cottage and 2 chestnut horses grazing by a fence. I knocked on the door, crying and hiccuping, and this woman with gray hair and a bun, glasses like a librarian, opened it. She'd looked startled, like she'd been expecting someone else. I told her about my brother leaving me. She said gently, "Stay right here, sweetheart." Then she went inside for a moment, came back out with a shawl around her shoulders, and said that she'd walk me home. We talked as we walked, and about the train tracks, about the woods, and she seemed to know exactly where we were. When we reached the tracks, I pointed excitedly down the direction that led to my grandpa's house, shouting, "That way." But when I turned to thank her, she wasn't there, and there was no sound, no footprints, just the wind and the rustling trees. I ran the rest of the way home, and my brother was already there, and everyone was outside about to start searching for me. Grandma made dinner, and I told her I wanted to bake cookies for the nice lady who helped me. Grandma smiled until I mentioned the horses. Her face went pale. "There aren't any horses near here, honey. Not on this side of the tracks," she said. "And across the tracks, well, that's all forest. No one lives over there." I insisted I'd seen the cottage, the woman and the horses, and the next morning Grandma packed sandwiches and took me to show her where I'd been. We walked for hours, but when we reached the clearing, there was no house, no horses, just the field. And lying right in the middle of it, my red hat that I'd lost the day before. We had our picnic there anyway, and I still don't know who that woman was. Maybe a ghost, maybe something older than that. But I like to think she'd lived by the creek once, long before the train tracks ever came through. The Giggle in the Glen. When I was 13, I lived in a small village tucked between green hills and misty fields in northern Wales. One afternoon, my cat, a scrappy tabby with more attitude than sense, managed to slip out the back gate. She was always getting into trouble, but this time she'd vanished completely. I started searching around the village lanes, calling her name until I remembered a stretch of old forest at the edge of town. A place I'd never dared explore before. Something about it always looked quiet. But thinking the cat might have chased a bird up there, I decided to go check. The woods were darker than I expected. My voice sounded strange when I called her name. The trees were swallowing it. Still, no sign of her, so I kept walking until I came into a clearing that felt oddly still. It's as if everything, the wind, the birds, had all stopped. And that's when I noticed it. Faint crunches in the dry leaves behind me. Footsteps perfectly matching my pace. And if I stopped, they stopped. If I moved, they moved. And I couldn't see anyone, just empty air and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Something deep in me said not to run. But after a few more steps, the fear broke loose and I bolted. And that's when I heard it, a sharp giggle. It was high-pitched and close enough to brush my neck. And I sprinted all the way home, and the cat was sitting smugly on the back step, licking her paw like nothing had happened. I didn't go back to those woods again. Some places don't want to be found. Thanks for listening, guys. See ya.
Step into the enigma with Paranormal M. Our stories will take you on a roller coaster of disbelief and wonder. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to embark on a journey through our latest captivating tales. Glitch in the Matrix. It happened today. I was watching the movie Nope on Amazon Prime along with my mom and her dog. There's a small ottoman that sits on the floor in the living room, circular in shape with a lid. As I'm watching the movie, the ottoman lid begins to lift by itself and closed abruptly. It made completely out of wood. The dog, myself, and Mom proceed to just stare at it. The ottoman is woven and you can see through it. I thought maybe a small animal was inside. I get up to lift the top off the lid and see nothing inside. It's empty. The lid has some weight to it, too. I proceed to fan my arms at it, checking to see if maybe a gust of wind lifted the lid. The air wasn't on. Windows weren't open. I thought maybe the vibrations from the soundbar lifted the lid. I rewind the movie back 20 seconds to see if the same thing would happen. Absolutely nothing. We proceed to finish the movie. Nothing has happened since. A dream that was kind of not a dream. So a little context. This happened about 10 years ago. I was 17 at the time. I was a little psychopath back then. Dreams of me going on mass killings and fantasies of burning down my school. Please keep in mind, I'm nothing like that anymore. When I was in this state, I had a few experiences with the demonic that I can't explain. I was being awakened by loud stomping and being shaken awake. For some reason, I hated when anybody said the word God. I would hear whispers in different languages in my own room. I might make a separate post, or edit them in, I guess, about these experiences. But eventually I started to get back on the right path. I started developing empathy. I started changing for the better, and I had 2 dreams during this phase. One before, which I won't talk about because every time I try and tell the story I get incredibly sick. But I will say I met an actual demon in the dream world that looked absolutely horrifying. And one after the phase. So one night I slept and I was having a normal dream. Can't remember fuck all about this part of the dream, but this normal dream did a complete transition. It went from a normal dream to me in my bed listening to footsteps of something coming to my room. I turned to look at my door, and the second that I felt this presence get close, what I saw was a dark entity of myself. I had a fight or flight response, and since that door is the only exit, I threatened it. If you don't leave right now, I swear I'm going to. Before I finish, it teleports right to my bedside and holds my arm and shoulder down. I feel excruciating pain in my shoulder. I jolt awake and I realize that I'm in the exact same position I was in that dream. There are other dreams I could share, and I might edit them in within the week. Out of most of the paranormal events that I've experienced, with the exception of a few, the dreams of them are the ones that are most interesting to me. As it is said, you aren't capable of dreaming somebody that you have never seen before. Yet I have seen dreams of horribly disfigured creatures with horns that I certainly have never seen before in my life. But anyway, if enough people are interested, I might share more stories that don't cause me physical discomfort. Sorry for the bad writing, it's late and I need to get some sleep. Tales from a Haunted Apartment. I've been experiencing paranormal occurrences since I was 7. And while most things were still absolutely weird and almost impossible, they were also theoretically explained by something, however unlikely. But a few occurrences were completely impossible, and this is the story of one of those occurrences. It was a Saturday in 2015. I was in my early 20s, and my boyfriend, now husband, was at work. Saturdays were always my cleaning days, before he got off and we were relaxing for the weekend. I was washing dishes at the sink next to the stove, separated by a small section of countertop. I would line up the dishes that I would wash in order on the stove on the top. This is relevant. And I had a spatula up against the back of the stove, just under the dials. A rerun of Dr. Phil was on. I would go watch between commercials and return to dishwashing during the commercial breaks. The only other living thing in that apartment with me was my cat, Lulu. Lou was perched beside the open window in the living room, snoozing. I heard the show come back on and raced back to the living room. As I'm standing there watching, I hear a clatter of plastic hit my fridge. Then a second clatter as whatever it hits the floor. Going back into the kitchen, I see the spatula that had been against the back of the stove lying in front of the fridge. The fridge was directly across from the stove, about 3 to 4 feet away. When I heard the spatula hit, it sounded like it had hit pretty high up on the fridge, maybe around the freezer area. I've spent 8 years trying to figure out how the hell a plastic spatula could spontaneously launch 4 feet across the room and have come up with nothing. There have been other weird-ass things happen in this apartment. Tales from a Haunted Apartment, Part 2. A couple of weeks ago, I posted the most out-there, unexplainable paranormal phenomenon that occurred in the apartment that we lived in prior to where we're at now. I would link the post, but I'm a bit illiterate in the ways of Reddit posting. I'm more of an avid lurker. My apologies. I want to post the other experiences that I've had in that place before moving on to sharing my more recent occurrences. Story number 1. To my recollection, this is the first experience I've had in the apartment, circa 2014-ish. My husband was working night shift, and I was laying in bed around 7 p.m. I was either reading or watching TV. It was just my cat and I, and she was sleeping on the bed in the far corner. It was early summer, but it was raining hard, so the windows were closed. My attention was diverted as my almost fully open bedroom door started to close slowly. I just watched in disbelief as it closed all the way, latched and clicked. Open again all the way until the doorknob hit the wall behind it. Close fully again, then open again to almost its original position. The whole deal lasted about 30 seconds. I was absolutely stunned. Nothing so visual or brazen had ever happened before. I tried to rationalize it as maybe the upstairs neighbor had stepped on the floor in a weird way, repeatedly. But we lived there for 4 years after this happened, and our upstairs neighbor was loud. All caps. It almost sounded like dragging across the floor whenever he walked, and I've had the incoming old lady moment bang on the ceiling different times when he was speaking, or arguing with maybe a significant other. Super loudly, mind you. The point is, with such heavy-footed, loud neighbors, the door thing never happened again. Story number 2. A few years pass, and my husband is now working day shift. I was doing shift work, and that particular week I was getting off at work at 1 a.m. Hubby would always stay up until I got home to make sure that I was safe. We would then smoke a bowl or two, and he would go to bed, and I would stay up playing video games. Nice. 4 or 5 a.m. rolls around, and I figure I would just crash on the couch instead of disturbing husband's sleep, and he would get me up at 7 when he awoke. And, as it would be, just sent me to bed. I threw on the TV and I laid down on the couch, waiting to get tired enough to actually fall asleep. Whatever I was watching went to a commercial break. I'm about to light up a cigarette when I hear a knocking on the wood floor, directly in front of where I'm sitting. I think I actually stopped breathing for a moment. We lived on the bottom floor, and this did not sound muffled, as if it was coming up from the underneath, but rather as clear and concise as if somebody had rapped their knuckles on the wood of a floor. There's a moment sometimes when stuff happens where you're just like, was that even real? What the fuck just happened? I was deep in that moment when it started again. It seemed to form a bit of a pattern on its second go. I think it went 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. I was just sitting there floored. Pun absolutely intended. Very nice. With an unlit cigarette in my hand and an undoubtedly dumbass look on my face trying to rationalize what I was hearing and how fucking close it was to me. Whatever it was knocked a third time. I believe 2 short knocks. That's when I get my ass in gear and said, "Hubby's slumber be damned," and ran into our room and cuddled into him as closely as I could. That's another occurrence that never happened again, but somehow one of the most jarring. I'm pretty sure that's everything that's happened in that apartment, but I'm a new mom on low sleep, so if I remember anything else from this place, I'll throw it in the post. I'm really excited to tell you all about what's happened since moving into this place, but again, new mom, so I'll do it when I have some time to write it cohesively. Experience on the Big Island of Hawaii. I was living in Hawaii temporarily on the Big Island. I was working on an organic farm in the Hawaiian jungle for a witch doctor. He was such a wonderful guy. I had no cell service in that part of the island unless I climbed this huge hill for 1 bar. This hill was made of cinder and lava rock and created by a lava flow back in the 60s. It was about 100 feet high, maybe taller. The climb was difficult, but feasible. One night I was very distraught because someone I was traveling with and had trusted became extremely abusive and controlling. I had been keeping my husband informed back on the mainland and frequently checked in with him. I had suspicions that my friend was trying to trap me on the island with him and break my husband and I up. He had been trying to gaslight me and wipe out my self-esteem. And the other people I was traveling with were too scared to stand up to this guy. He got in a huge screaming match, and I basically put him in his place. I told him that I wanted nothing to do with him. I started making plans to ditch him and go work on a different farm. The witch doctor agreed. After dark, I go to the room that I was renting, laid down and tried to calm myself to sleep. I woke up and I realized I had dozens of little fire ants in bed with me, and I'd gotten stung all over. Little fire ant stings suck. That was really the coup de grace these crappy few days. Against my better judgment, I slid out of bed, shook the fire ants off, grabbed my headlight, and began to truck up the treacherous hill to go talk to my husband. It was pitch black, and if when I looked up, I could see the Milky Way, it was pretty cool. I took the meandering path to the base of the hill and climbed it. When I got there, I dialed my husband. Hawaii was 6 hours behind my hometown, so it was in the early morning hours for my husband. During the day, people mine the lava rock there and sell it to customers to decorate their yards. While I was talking to him, I suddenly got the horrible sensation that I was being watched from afar. I got the feeling that someone or something was up there with me. Something felt very wrong, and my intuition screamed that I was in danger. Thought it was somebody living up there that was investigating me at first. I listened for footfalls. Nothing. I'd been up there during the day, and I'd gotten a really bad vibe before that, and I just brushed it off as the unknown. The hill was like a narrow cliff, and it was easy to slip off the other side because of the unstable lava rock. The feelings I got were unusual, because I felt like it hated me and wanted me dead. Almost like it wanted to scare me or even push me off that cliff. I was no stranger to this feeling, because I've had other experiences in my hometown that gave me similar sensations. This is where it gets odd. The air became very heavy and thick. It was suffocating. The insects went silent. The frogs stopped chirping. I could have heard a leaf fall. It was that silent. My breath caught in my chest as I froze. It was like the normal sounds of outside all went silent at once. The feeling of being watched felt closer and more intense. My headlight dimmed, and this massive black thing engulfed me. It not only engulfed me, but my surroundings as well. I couldn't see the trees or stars. The only thing I could see was a few feet in front of my face from the feeble light coming from my headlamp. I was totally surrounded. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was terror unlike anything I'd ever felt before. My light got dimmer and dimmer, and this thing felt like it was closing in. Gradually closer and closer, I got the feeling that it was going to push me off of the precipice I was standing on. The anxiety felt was pure fight or flight. I felt wave after wave of adrenaline surge through my body. I began to shake all over and my knees became weak. I was totally surrounded by and engulfed by this black thing. It was the blackest black I have ever experienced. The blackness looked alive somehow. I had never seen anything as black as this in my life. It felt sentient. I felt like it knew what it was doing. I could barely think. I felt like I was being embraced by death. If I so much as breathed, I would die. Finally, it was just too close for comfort. I whipped around in circles and snarled, "Leave me alone now! Get away from me!" In my most aggressive, bigger than I felt tone. I tried to sound as mean and threatening as possible. I know the sound of my voice had to carry on for miles in each direction. In a split second, I felt the heaviness and suffocating sensation disappear. My light was no longer dim. I could see the trees and the stars again. The frogs and insects started gradually chirping too. Whatever it was had gone. I hauled ass down that hill, slipping and sliding most of the way. I went back up there during the day over the next few days, and in some parts it still had a bad vibe. I'm kind of a weird shit magnet. And I'm pretty sure this is something I inherited too, from my dad, ironically, who claims to not believe in any of that stuff, and gets kind of cagey when I asked him about it. But it's fine to talk about weird shit that he's seen after a couple beers. I guess it's a side effect of being from a family of agnostic Australian clever bastards. It's eased off a lot as I've gotten older, as it did with him, but I've seen a lot of weird shit for someone who's been brought up as a godless heathen in the household of equally godless critical thinkers. There's plenty of stuff I can rationalize, but just as much I can't quite shake. The big stuff that stands out for me are 3 times where I've seen UFOs. When I say UFO, I really do not believe aliens from outer space visit us. Space is too fucking big, okay? The couple times I've seen shadow people and beings that I can't identify, but really do not like. Probably ghosts, but I doubt they're conscious dead people. I really hope they're not conscious dead people. Sleep paralysis shit, that was just too real. That's just the cliff notes, and I might expand on them later when I've got the energy. Besides that, I've got this semi-regular thing with true deja vu, where I'll often visit a place in dreams that I've never visited before, but inevitably will within the next couple of months. I'm oddly sensitive to the feel of the place. That last might just be a neurodivergent side effect, though. I've also kind of fallen into being the witchy one of my group of friends. They usually come to me for advice on WS, and at least 3 times now I've been invited to new digs, specifically to vibe check the place. I don't know. I'm not really a gold star believer, but I also know the universe is too huge and strange for us to have all the answers yet. My black cat is the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. Back in 2011, I was having a really bad time health-wise. For the year before that year, and the one after, my lungs filled up with fluid as soon as the cold weather hit, and I was in the hospital for at least 10 days at a time. 2011 was the worst. For reasons yet unknown to me, the specialist in charge of my care incorrectly diagnosed me with tuberculosis and gave me drugs that would either kill or cure me. It nearly killed me. It reacted poorly with my diabetes, and the lung specialist was a douchebag who didn't care if I was throwing up for 3 days straight. I almost died from ketoacidosis, and I was in the ICU for 3 days. In hospital for 13. I also had a gnarly near-death experience, but that's another story. While I was in the ICU, passing in and out of consciousness, and completely unaware of the passage of time, I hallucinated a cat. I would be on the edge of sleep, and something would jump up on the bed with me, chirp, and curl up so I could feel warmth and purring. Sometimes he would eat my leg through the sheets, waking me up. I saw him come into the room only once. He was a big, black, long-haired tomcat with an aggressively cheerful disposition and huge yellow eyes, such that I nicknamed him Lambert in my head. I even asked the nurses about him, half out of my skin as I was, and that was when I realized that he wasn't a real animal. I made him a promise in my head all the same. He had kept me going by letting me think there was one creature there with me 24/7, keeping me tethered to life. So if we met again, I would return the favor and look after him, however I could. Fast forward 8 years to 2019. My childhood cat Lupin had finally succumbed to old age. She was born in 2000. And to try and deal with the grief, I was on Facebook scrolling through local cat sanctuaries and rescuers. And who should I see but a 5-month-old kitten who was the exact match to the hallucination, spirit, dream, whatever, that had been keeping me wanting to stay alive back then. I was sure the moment I saw him, and I was even more sure when we went to go meet him at the shelter. And I saw the same white freckles on his shoulders. I had had less than inches from my but I had had inches from my face as I drifted, and he purred in my hospital bed. Mom vetoed the idea of Lambert, so we called him Jet. He had chronic anxiety issues and no food security from being on the street for his first 3 months. And it kept me on my goddamn toes while I was getting over the death of my best friend. But he's got the softest fur ever, and he's a chronic cuddler, and I owe him a lot. He still chirps when he jumps up on my bed. Not exactly a gold star believer. My philosophy is weird shit happens, but I'm inclined to look for the logical explanations first. I know I was super sick and my brain was throwing up all kinds of nonsense. I know that 8 years is a long time for memory to change, especially of such a blurry and confused period. But emotionally, I can't shake that feeling that I met this cat nearly a decade before he was even born. My near-death experience. Okay, so other people in the other thread were asking for this, and it's way shorter than my other story. In 2011, when I was dying from ketoacidosis, they brought me into the ER in a wheelchair, and I was more or less conscious, if extremely weak. I remember seeing my reflection in a mirror and thinking that it wasn't a person. It was already a corpse in my clothes. If you don't know what ketoacidosis is, it's when a diabetic's blood sugar has been too high for too long and lowers the pH of the blood to the point where it becomes acidic enough to start eating your veins from the inside. You burn up. I was starting to hallucinate when they laid me down in the bed, so they could get insulin and fluids into me. I thought I was lying in the Mediterranean courtyard, alone in full sun, and I was too weak to move. The sun was so hot and bright, my skin began to burn like a cigarette end, turning to white ash and floating away to reveal glowing coals inside. I was so thirsty. At the same time, I could hear the nurses around me. I could hear them talking, but I couldn't speak. My mouth was too dry. I remember hearing one of them say that they would have to open my carotid artery because all my other veins had closed up and shut down. I remember the horror of that and still not being able to move or react to it. After a while, I couldn't hear them either, but there was a roar like machinery or a huge plane coming down. I felt like something was above me, but I couldn't see anything because it was too bright. I was burning and peeling away, and it was sucking whatever was left of me up into the sky. After that, there was blessed darkness, and eventually I woke up in the ICU with my mom on my bedside. They told me later that if my dad had brought me into the ER even 20 minutes later, I would have been taken straight into resuscitation. It's not as close to death as some people have been, I guess, but that courtyard and the feeling and sight of my skin burning away like that's really stuck with me. Hunting lease experience. Currently, I'm at my family's hunting lease. Last night, I was in the bedroom that I'm sleeping in. It has 2 twin beds and isn't the biggest, and it was just me. My parents are 2 rooms down. At 11:44, I woke up suddenly, but I had an eerie feeling. Looking up, there's a small rack with hunting clothes and 2 small backpacks. That's when I see a tall, female-looking, transparent yet black figure. It was quite tall. As soon as I noticed her, she said something along the lines of, "Come on, take a backpack and come with me." Unsure of what I was looking at, I say, "What? "Who are you?" She repeats her line. "Come on, take the backpack and come with me." I reach down to my side and grab my phone, turning the flashlight on, and immediately facing it to her. She's gone. Immediately, my heart starts beating out of my chest. I'm having trouble breathing. Keeping the light on, I begin to pray. After sitting for a while and calming down, I decide to try to sleep again. Not long after I wake up, I have my back to the wall, and that's when I see a figure in the bed next to me. I freeze and they sit up, staring at me. This made me sit up quickly, and then see another figure next to the rack on my left. My heart is beating out of my chest again, so I run out to go to my parents' room and I tell them. They know I love paranormal things, and I have a deep belief for them. I was shaking almost uncontrollably, and my voice is trembling as well. They say I could sleep in their room, full and twin bed. My dad says it could be easier to sleep in the bunks outside their door, just leave their door open. I set myself up to sleep in a bunk by our dog's crates. Still uneasy, I'm constantly looking around in fear that they're still there. Suddenly, as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear my dad freaking out and my mom consoling him. Apparently, something was trying to rip his blanket off of him. Found out this morning. I wake up at around 5:30 a.m. before leaving for our morning hunt, to the sound of a banging noise. Like someone hitting wood in the room. It happened 3 times, and 3 different times too. 3 minutes, 5, then 3. It's never together. It was normally 3 bangs. I'm not sure what happened, but it definitely is. It just has me spooked. Even just writing this, totally uneasy. I'm a huge paranormal fan. I guess you could call me an enthusiast, you could say. So I'm trying to think if I could have done something to anger whatever it was, but soon our lease is ending since the owners want it for themselves. Weird event happened. My partner and I have been living with his grandmother for years now. Him before me. I've lived with her in her house for the past 5 years. She lived alone in the house after all her kids moved out and her husband died in his mid-40s years prior. She has been a widow for over 50 years, but weird things always happen in her house. She's always raging out and in a bad mood, constantly complaining, and is very hateful. So much so that not even her own sons visit her due to her temper tantrums and negative attitude towards everything. She's highly abusive and unstable. Due to her age and chronic arthritis, she's always sitting in the same spot. She's practically immobile because she's in pain, so she's typically sitting in one place every day. Days and nights pass, and she sits in the same place during the day and night. It's sometimes really eerie because at times she just sits in a corner in the dark, since we're at work and we aren't always around her. But she's always there when we leave, and then we come back and she's there. I've always felt an evil energy come from her because she's so hateful and negative. She doesn't even like people touching her, and some of the things that she says seem too evil to come from an old woman. I've read very negative, hateful energy, especially arguing and temper tantrums, which is how she communicates. Attracts a lot of evil spirits. I think so because I think they resonate at a similar wavelength, but I never thought much of it. There's been some weird occurrences at her house. Once she was at a hospital due to a fever, and it was unusual of her not to be in the house since she's always here. The night her bedroom toilet blew up randomly around 2 a.m. We woke up and thought somebody broke into the house, but then find this out and have to call a plumber the next morning. It was the only time that she didn't sleep in the house, and this happened. Another time, we were all sitting downstairs and we heard multiple things in her bathroom, and they fell on their own upstairs. All the windows were closed and there was no air ventilation where that could have even occurred. She had also been downstairs for hours prior, so no one had been in her bathroom for several hours. Last night she was having another one of her temper tantrums and continued yelling. I then was so exhausted after just all of that arguing that I sort of just left her area and continued arguing with my partner on how we need to move out. We were both exhausted from work and he worked overtime, and I also had a long 2-hour commute after work to then get home to the yelling and complaining. As we continued arguing into the night, around 1 a.m. the TV in our bedroom began turning on its own. Neither of us were near the remote. The other freaky thing was that the TV's backlight turning on and off on its own, which is unrelated to the actual TV being on or off. It's an entirely different connection, which requires its own separate remote and was sitting by the TV. This was also freaky and had no explanation. My partner just turned off the power from that side of the wall to stop the TV from turning off and on. Haunting at a house I lived in. Was it demonic activity? I experienced some strange and freaky things living in an old house when I was 16. My parents had bought it years ago and sold within 6 years of living there. I'd get home from school, I was on the computer room downstairs, and there were a few times where I'd randomly hear someone call my name in my mother's voice. When I used to get up to look around the house and respond with, "What?" I was completely alone in that house. My sister used to hear my dad call her name from the first floor of the house, while she was on the second floor in her room. When she went downstairs, she was completely alone in the house. That day, she just took off in her car and left the house because it freaked her out that much. Another night, I fell asleep in my parents' room, so my parents would sleep in my room. Around 3 a.m., they heard 3 hard knocks at my bedroom door. My dad responded with, "Come in." No one did. So we got up and looked around to find us all asleep. When we first moved to this house, my dad found a collection of bowling balls in the garage that he immediately threw out after moving. To clear out the space. Months later, my brother and grandmother used to hear bowling balls falling down the attic staircase, but there were no bowling balls in the attic. And this is when my father shared with them that he found those bowling balls in the garage when we first moved in. The creepiest situation that happened to us was a night when my parents saw me walk into their room in the middle of the night. I was wearing a vintage-laced black turtleneck dress, and I stood at the end of their bed. My mom asked what I was doing up. I suddenly stared into her eyes and stood there in silence. She asked me to go to sleep and dozed off. When she opened her eyes again, I was missing. She then asked my dad if he had ever seen me leave the room. He said no. So he then got up to check on me. I was asleep in my room wearing a red pajama t-shirt. During this time period, I went through a rather serious state of bulimia, depression, and isolated myself often. I felt too self-conscious and insecure to go out and show myself. After selling the house, the new owner also experienced paranormal experiences, like getting her legs pulled down the basement staircase one night. We eventually did research and find out an older woman had passed in the house previous to us moving, but we didn't know what kind of spiritual activity happened while she was alive with her family. The experiences that we had are connected to demonic activity. Demons are the only ones capable of imitating human voices or taking on human forms. I always wonder if something sinister has attached itself to me since living in that house. As life has gone into a very dark, endless spiral of bad circumstances and bad luck for me since. Ask Reddit. 2 stories stick to mind from my childhood that still creep the fuck out of me. One of my earliest memories is of walking past my parents' bedroom. I froze in the doorway as I looked into the bed, and I saw what looked like the shape of a person kneeling on the bed, but underneath the bed sheets. As I stared at it, the bed sheets kind of floated down, so it looked like the bed was perfectly made. The shape just sank into the bed. I was freaked out. 2. It was a short walk home from primary school. I was about 9 to 10 years old. I'm walking on my own, and a car pulls up. It has my nana, granddad, and cousin inside. They say, "Hey, we've just been over to your mom's house. Do you want to lift home?" I said no, it's only around the corner, but they were quite persistent. I remember a hand coming out of the open door, but I just remembered being quite flippant and just like, "No, it's okay, I'll see you guys later." I ran around the corner to my house. I said to my mom when I got home, "I just saw Granddad and Nana in the car. They said they'd been over here to see you." My mom said that she hasn't seen or heard from them all day. I was adamant. She made me phone my grandparents, who then confirmed that they hadn't seen me all day or been over to my parents' house. So who the fuck were the people in the car? Still creeps me out thinking if I was having a weird trip of some kind, or if I almost got snatched and just saw the people as my grandparents. Little man wanted to marry 5-year-old me and take me away. This happened when I was 5 years old. My dad had just passed away. I barely get sick, even till this day, but I had a fever then. I remember I'd be lying down on the bed and see 2 little people. Now, they weren't like dwarves or gnomes. They were basically like Barbie dolls, but as big as water bottles, like Nestle bottles. They'd appear on my bed and basically entertain me. I don't remember what they wore, but it was a man and a lady. The lady never really spoke to me, but the man did. They do all sorts of things to entertain me, such as cartwheels, dancing, backflips, and so on and so forth. Now, my mom wasn't really home much, but she was at the hospital where my dad passed away, sorting out death certificates or whatever she did. So I was home with some relatives that I barely knew. So I kept to myself, and I would just talk to these little people. But a time came where the little man would talk about marrying me and taking me away. I don't remember what in details that he was saying, but he did freak me out so much that it caused me to have a manic episode, and I was screaming, "I don't want to marry you," over and over and over again. I was at home with my aunts and my cousins, and they had no idea what to do, so they rushed me to the hospital where my mom was. According to my mom, she tried to hold me and calm me down, but I had this distant look in my eyes, like I didn't know who she was or who anyone was. And then suddenly I recognize and then forget on and off. I remember a nurse giving me an injection. I don't know what it was exactly, but I was able to calm down. I still had a fever for 2 weeks after that, but eventually I was able to recover and never see the little people again. Years later, I hear my mom talking to her friend about the things that I was saying. I said things like, "I don't want a ring. I don't want to leave here. Don't take me away. I don't want to marry you. I don't know if this is I don't know if this is a paranormal experience," but my mom did have a priest who said that there was a female entity living in her house. But the one I encountered was a male. So I'm confused. Do kids have hallucinations while having a fever? Yeah. Even if it was hallucinations, I knew nothing about marriage to that extent. Do I have a mental disorder? I haven't had hallucinations since then. My mom recently told me about a little man that she encountered during her childhood. I'll narrate that another time. Could it be the same? Weird experience. This is the weird shit. So 4 years ago, I didn't have a very good home life. My mom used to be an alcoholic and had moved around my whole life from place to place, so I never really had any childhood friends to spend the night or lean on, really. I used to stay at my friend's place after school and ask to stay until dinner, mainly because I didn't want to eat all their food out of respect for being the nicest people that I knew. I also knew that entire apartment property. This night was going back home and I just felt off and different. From the moment of going up the stairs, I was on alert and taking mental notes of everything that I was doing, from how I was walking up the stairs to locking the door when coming in. I locked both lock deadbolts and at the top lock, and I always remembered because I had a fear of my dad stumbling in the house drunk randomly and harming us. I remember seeing a couple of six-packs in my mom. Knowing that she was drunk and almost passed out, I went into my room too, figuring I would just play some games. Just one problem. There was a giant-ass thunderstorm that had only gotten worse since staying at my friend's place. I didn't want to fuck up my PS4 if the power went out, so I instead laid down in my bed and scrolled through Snapchat. I started talking to one of my friends via Snapchat. I can't remember what we ended up talking about, but I remember opening up a window to listen to the rain. As I was texting, I heard footsteps outside. It sounded as if someone was pacing back and forth on the wet grass at night. I tried to reason in my head as to why somebody would be stepping on this wet grass and not be underneath the cover of the porch, but I just minded my own business. I was on the second floor, the top floor. So even if someone was trying to break in, they would need to be 12 feet or having a ladder or battering ram. That's when I heard a rhythmic tapping right beside my head on the wall. Tap, tap, tap. My skin instantly jumped. And before I could text my friend, tap, tap, tap. My head was by the window, couldn't have been no more than a foot away. I wanted to look outside, but my mind was already racing with possibilities. Tap, tap, tap. Just as I was about to start recording, the taps turned into loud and long scratching. I know this is going to sound weird, but I swear it sounded like whatever it was had 3 long claws. Again, the scratching happened, and it was in a rhythm which weirded me out even more. After that, I literally stuck my head out, expecting some sort of creature or asshole on a ladder. Poof. Nothing. No footsteps scurrying away, no tree branch, no animal, nothing but rain. I had taken a video of my window on Snapchat and sent it to my friend to confirm that I wasn't going crazy. She heard it too. I went to the living room. Mom was passed out and everything seemed safe. And that's when I had noticed the door was completely unlocked, even the top lock. I quickly woke my mom up and explained what had happened, and then grabbed a hammer to clear the house. I remember thinking I was going to have to bludgeon someone, but thank God no one had come in. I shut my window and told my mom I'd be staying up for that night to keep watch. I burned some sage, said a prayer, and just tried my best to make sense of the situation. Nothing like that has happened since then. Breaking news. Not every spirit is a demon. Put yourself in the shoes of a lost soul wandering around, unable to communicate properly with the living. You've been stuck chilling in a place for years, decades, maybe even centuries. and you have no idea why you're still here. Wouldn't you be a bit pissed off and acting out in unsettling ways? I know I would. Sure, there are some spirits that are malevolent or downright evil, but that also doesn't automatically make them demonic. Being evil and being demonic are not the same thing. Let's not throw around the demonic label so freely just because a spirit did something creepy or unsettling. Not to mention the fact that if you've never set any clear boundaries with spirits, how can they possibly know what's acceptable or not? Before coming from their necks on Reddit and screaming demon, consider that they might not even be aware that they're making you uncomfortable. They might mean all of the best and just need some guidance. So let's talk about using tools like pendulums or Ouija boards to communicate with spirits. Newsflash: they're not encrypted phone calls to your grandma. Just because you asked a specific spirit to move your pendulum and got a different spirit responding, doesn't mean you've opened up a demonic portal. It could just be a mix-up or a misinterpretation. Everybody can touch a pendulum after all. If it really was this easy to open up a portal for demons to come through, every single girl who's ever been to a slumber party would be possessed by now. I'm not saying that there aren't genuine cases of demonic activity out there, and portals can be opened if you fuck around too much, but let's not jump to conclusions and automatically assume the worst when someone says that they hear taps in the corner of their room. Although I think it's pretty harmless to comment this under every post. It's also unhelpful and very annoying. The spirit world is a complex place, and not everything that goes bump in the night is a demon. Nicely dressed man in my room. Just to rule this out, nope, there is no gas leak in my house. So here's the deal. I've been having visions of this old man in my mind. They're short but vivid flashes. He's always dressed in a nicely tailored suit with black and white stripes and wears a fedora. I can't say that he looks evil, but his presence leaves me feeling confused and unsettled. This started a few days ago. Since it first happened, whenever I'm in my home, I have this constant feeling of being watched. It's as if someone is observing my every move, even though I can't see anyone physically present. Last night, things took a more chilling turn. I woke up abruptly to the sound of doors banging. Assuming it was just someone in the house using the restroom, I could even hear footsteps in the hallway. But, to my surprise, they stopped right at my bedroom door. When I opened my eyes, there he was. The man from my visions standing in my doorway, just staring at me. He didn't make any sudden movements or say a word. He was just there. And I couldn't move or react. I was scared, but just because I didn't understand what was happening. I have no idea who this man is or what his intentions might be. It's an unnerving experience, to say the least. And although this is a very stereotypical story, I believe stereotypes exist for a reason. Do you guys know if he's trying to tell me something? Why is this happening now? And why did he give me those visions before entering my room? Kelsey Davies feels so fake. So for a while now, I've been watching Kelsey Davies' videos on YouTube. I don't know why I keep giving her more views, because she actually annoys me so much. She's a self-proclaimed medium and used to live in a haunted house, and says that she's been seeing spirits her whole life. She owns 2 haunted dolls and a haunted painting. Now you'd think with all this stuff she'd be a seasoned paranormal investigator, right? But every time Kelsey goes to a haunted location, she pulls the same tired stunt. Oh my god, I got like a vision. Girl, if you're so experienced, why does every vision startle you like a jump scare in a B-grade horror movie? Brace yourselves for the most exaggerated reactions you've ever seen. Whenever there's even the slightest sound, Kelsey leaps up 3 meters in the air like she just saw a ghost. Oh, wait. Isn't that the whole point of her ghost hunting videos? And let's not forget her ear-piercing, cringe-worthy American Girl accent when she uses a spirit box or EVP and gets the exact answer that she was fishing for. Then proceeds to go, "Oh my God, ew, and that scared me, ah." Excuse me. Not only is this annoying and screaming fake, but this is also where things get downright disrespectful. She's once made a video inside of a house where a young boy was murdered, and supposedly his spirit still lurks in the closet, hiding from the murderer. So what does Kelsey do? She asks the poor spirit to make itself known by doing something like moving a toy or playing with the lights. Lo and behold, a ball rolls a few seconds later, and what does she scream? "Ew, that's so creepy," I'm guessing. Even if we give Kelsey the benefits of the doubt and say that her content is not staged, she still went to that location to capture evidence, right? So if there really is a little boy's spirit seeking assistance, picture being scared and vulnerable only to have a supposed spirit lover like Kelsey scream, "Ew." They're writing E-E-E-W, assuming they mean ew. Never seen this girl. It's not just fake, it's straight up heartless. My parents' house is haunted, and they refuse to believe it, even though the ghost is affecting us. This story is about the current house my parents live in. My parents' house, house, have always been haunted. I've always been sensitive to ghosts for as long as I can remember. Every house that we've lived in has been haunted, and I've been haunted, and a few of those ghosts are attached to me still. Even though I'm moved on to things, they still occur. Most of the ghosts attached are good. I make sure of it, so don't worry. Anywho, backstory time. I will probably be referencing multiple houses, so I'm going to name the current house that they live in as the Shelby house. When I was younger, we lived in the same neighborhood that we live in now. We moved out of our first house and moved to a couple of different houses, and now my parents are living in the same original neighborhood I grew up in. It is a house a few houses down from our first house. The Shelby house has had a few different owners, and being a small town, we knew most of the owners. Well, the previous owners, Thomas and Grace, fake names for privacy, were a couple with an empty nest. I'm not sure how long they owned the house before us, but they were the couple that my parents bought the house from. Yes, they aren't there now, but when we moved in, the mailbox and the curb across from it had rose bushes at the end of the driveway. They've been there for a while. As I said, we knew some of the previous owners of this house, so the rose bushes were there since I was a kid. I remember seeing them when we would go visit sometimes. Now, the driveway is horrendous. It is so hard to get out of. That's very important in this story. Back to the story. So there were a lot of different incidents of this happening to this point, and Grace would make jokes to us about it. When my parents bought the house, Grace said, "Be careful of the rose bushes, they're cursed. The roses caused Thomas to die." She made some joke like, "Just make sure you don't run over the roses," and laughed. My parents are super religious, so they didn't believe her. They didn't really believe in ghosts or curses. Well, every time somebody related to Thomas and Grace, themselves, friends, family, or anybody, and they would run over the rosebush on the curb opposite the mailbox, and they would have the worst luck for an entire week, and the people would tell Thomas and Grace about it. Now, this is where the story takes a turn. Thomas ran over the rosebush one day, and a week later, he sadly had a heart attack and died inside the house. That's what leads Grace to sell the house to my parents. It's important to note that Thomas was 6 foot. I have no idea if the previous owner had stuff happen to them because of the rose bushes. Okay. Now, to how the roses take effect on my family. We haven't even lived in this house for a month, and my father accidentally ran over the rose bushes one day. That week, he got some rare type of food poisoning, went septic in the middle of the night, and had to be rushed to the hospital. He passed out at home while in the kitchen and fell and broke his ribs because he hit the floor so hard. The doctor said it was a miracle that he even survived. He was in the hospital for at least 2 months or more, and also had to have some type of surgery. Then my mother ran into the rose bush on her way to work. She had someone rear-end her. Everyone was fine in the crash, but still, like, what the fuck? So after those 2 things happened, my parents decided to take the rose bushes on both sides up and just replant different flowers. My parents were too busy to do it, so they told my brother-in-law and sister to do it. My brother-in-law's mother helped them. They all had bad luck and had catastrophic things happen to them for almost a month. Can't remember what they were because it was one day after another almost every single day. They replanted different flowers and the new flowers died almost immediately. No matter how many flowers my family replanted, they would all die. Now, I lived in that house for about a year or so before I moved out. I would always hear footsteps and voices when no one was home. I also had nightmares of me being haunted and possessed and bad things happening to my family. I would constantly have sleep paralysis. It was to the point that I wouldn't sleep because I was scared to have nightmares, or I would sleep in my car or sleep when I would come home from school around lunch. Well, one day I was home alone, and I was eating lunch in the living room, and I was on the phone with my boyfriend at the time. From the couch, you can see into my room and the hallway at pretty much any angle. I was on FaceTime and just watching GMM like every day when I get home from school. I remember I was eating ramen, and all of a sudden I see this 6-foot dark figure just walk into my room from the hallway. And then I heard someone go into my room. I saw my door open, and I said, "Okay, your boyfriend's name is spelled E-O-G-H-A-N, and I have no idea how to pronounce this. Yogan, I think somebody's in my house." And he said, "Okay, go get the pew-pew and stay on the phone. If something happens, I'll call the cops." I grab a knife from the kitchen and I walk into my room and I check it out. In my brother's room and the bathroom, and no one's there. A couple of days go by and the same thing happened. It kept happening. So I told my brother about it, and he said the same would happen to him. The day I moved out of that house, all of the nightmares of me having possessions and being haunted and bad things happening to my family and sleep paralysis all stopped. My brother tells me he has them now, and most nights he won't sleep in the house, he'll just go to my sister's and sleep. Every time I go to my parents' house now, I go home with a giant migraine, and I just feel like my entire energy was drained out of me. Male voices chatting. So this story isn't very scary, but my family and I, female 41, we found it entertaining. Already before this happened, my mom and I were sometimes called the family witches, more as a funny comment. So that weekend, my family met at my parents' place. My husband and 3 kids, my sister, plus husband and daughter, and my brother. By the way, my parents bought the house almost 40 years ago, and I think back then it was a fairly new house, and only one previous owner. Except for my brother, who lived a couple of streets down. We all spent the night at my parents' house on the upper floor. After a nice day with barbecue and chatting, and having a good time together, the larger room upstairs used to be my room when I was younger, and the 5 of us slept there, spread across 3 beds. Everyone was in bed and asleep already, but I could not sleep. I heard 2 men chatting, and chatting and chatting, and it kept me awake. It wasn't loud, I couldn't really make out what they were saying, but it was clearly a conversation by 2 men. So thinking that it must have been my dad and my brother on the porch beneath one of the windows, I decided to go check. I opened the roof window a bit and expected the noise to become louder, but nothing. No one was outside. I also checked the 2 other sides of the room that had no windows, but opening them did not make the voices louder or clearer to hear. I only heard them when the windows were closed, and the outside night noises were quiet. So my next rationale was that somebody left the TV on downstairs. I opened the room's door. As the house's floor plan is very open, you can hear everything from downstairs when you open the door. But it was very quiet downstairs. I went downstairs to be sure everything was indeed quiet. No one there, everyone sleeping. So I went to bed and eventually fell asleep. The next morning I came downstairs to a nice family breakfast, but was still quite tired from the short night. When I was asked if I didn't feel well, I told them the story. My dad shook his head in disbelief and in German said something like, "Not again," laughing at my mom. She immediately said, "See, I told you, I'm not imagining this." Turns out my mom heard these voices a few times already, but my dad brushed it off as nonsense. She was excited to be validated by what I heard. She had never told us about these voices.